Welcome, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, on whose lands we meet, share and work here at ACME. We're in Federation Square in the centre of Naarm, Melbourne. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge First Nations participants who may be joining us today. My name's Zoe. I'm a producer here at ACME of school programs, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our third session in our series on demystifying AI. And this one's all about exploring media literacy in the age of AI. And it's sure to be just as interesting and fascinating as the last two that Leon has delivered. If you missed the last session, you can catch up on the recording, which will have been emailed to you, the link to it. We'll also do the same with the recording from today, and it'll also be available on the event webpage next week. We will have, just like the last two sessions, a few minutes for some questions at the end of the session. So use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you have any questions along the way. And you can also upvote. So if someone has a question that you feel like is sort of similar to yours, that's a great way to show us that it's something that everybody's keen to ask. If we don't get through all the questions, I will endeavour to have, and Leon as well, to get those answers out to you when we send out the link to the video. So I'd like to welcome back our AI expert, Leon Furze. Over to you, Leon.
Thank you very much, Zoe, and good afternoon, everybody. So as Zoe said, hope you've enjoyed the last couple of sessions if you managed to attend those, and if you didn't, make sure you check out the recordings. I'll do a very brief recap of those sessions before we get into this one. But before we start talking about media literacy, I'll just do my own acknowledgement of country as well, and begin today by acknowledging the Gunditjmara Mara people as traditional custodians of the land which I'm presenting from today. Pay my respect to their elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So I'm beaming in live from the farm in southwest Victoria, just outside of Hamilton, if you know that region. If you don't, it's a lovely part of the country. Come and visit us, say hi sometime. But one thing that I've noticed over running these sessions, having people join in from across Australia and apparently a few international people, is that so many people in education are interested in generative artificial intelligence. We've seen a lot of the media hype around things like ChatGPT, but we really haven't had time yet to get our heads around what everything is. So the first couple of sessions did deal with ChatGPT quite exclusively. And in this one, we're going to branch out and look at another arm of generative AI and focus on image generation. So if you haven't had time to grapple with image generation yet, hopefully you'll come away with a bit of a broader knowledge. So we will do a bit of a recap on sessions 1 and 2, and then I'll talk about media literacy from my perspective as a former English and VC media teacher. We'll talk about how image generation works. So as with those earlier sessions on ChatGPT, I think it's really important that teachers have a broad understanding of the technology. And then we'll look at some of the challenges of artificial intelligence for media literacy, strategies for teaching media literacy, and issues surrounding copyright, intellectual property, and generative artificial intelligence. And as I mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. We'll try and leave 5 or 10 minutes for Q&A, particularly because this is a fairly new area for us. And we've spoken about text generation before, but we've never really looked at image generation. So just a recap on sessions 1 and 2. Now, this series is called Demystifying AI, and that's because AI is not magic. Irrespective of what some of the companies who produce the AI systems would like us to believe, AI is not a mythical creature or a godlike entity, or some kind of ghost in the machine. It is really just data and algorithms. It's a lot of data, and it's some very complex algorithms, but it is those things nonetheless. It's also not human. The jury is out on whether AI can be creative, but we certainly know that lots of people will be using it in creative and exciting and interesting ways. So I think it's really important for people in education in particular to demystify artificial intelligence. We don't need to get swept up in the hype around things like ChatGPT and image generation, but we do need to have a kind of a critical and a creative mindset when we approach these technologies, and particularly when we bring them into the classroom with our students. So ChatGPT we spoke about in the very first session, which feels like it was years ago now, but it was only a couple of months ago. And we talked about ChatGPT as a large language model trained on a huge data set. That data set, as I mentioned in that session, is really what gives these models all of their power. And it is increasingly important that the companies who produce these artificial intelligence systems get their hands on as much data as possible. And we'll talk about data sets and some of the implications of that when we get into the image generation in this session. And finally, we can use generative AI in education productively, but we do need to be aware of some of those trickier ethical concerns. So as I mentioned in those earlier sessions, there are concerns around bias and discrimination. Those will come back into play when we discuss image generation. There are concerns around human labor, the environmental impact of these technologies. There are concerns around academic integrity, truth, trustfulness, and some of those are definitely issues that we'll come across again with this session this afternoon on media literacy. So in summing up the recap, although we focused our attention on ChatGPT, a lot of what we learned in sessions 1 and 2 will be applicable as we start to talk about image generation, particularly those ideas concerning data sets and some of the biases and discriminations inherent in there. Now, if you have questions as we go along, obviously pop them into the Q&A. But just be thinking as we go through, if there's any of the terminology that I use, which is a little bit unusual or unfamiliar, or I say something and it just kind of sails over your head, absolutely don't be afraid to pop a clarifying question into the chat. We do see a few questions coming through after the session and things sent to me via direct message and email just asking for clarification. And you are absolutely not alone. If I say something and it goes over your head or it needs further information or the terminology is a bit vague or unusual, then it will benefit everybody if we ask these questions. I want to start off though talking about my other area of interest and my kind of bread and butter as a secondary teacher, which was working in media literacy. So I did my postgraduate certificate of education in the UK many years ago now, it feels like, and I studied English, media and drama. And then when I moved across to Australia, I predominantly taught VCE English, literature and VCE media studies. And really it was the VCE media study that gives me the lens that I'll be viewing this session through tonight. So when we study media, whether that's in the English classroom or in the media classroom or just across the curriculum, often what we're doing is we're critically analyzing media content. So that's a core component of media literacy. And that means not just taking everything at face value. So it means determining the truthfulness of media and whether we can trust what we're seeing in front of us, which is particularly important in light of things like the fake news and all of the narrative that surrounds that, particularly regarding online and social media. And the importance of identifying the source of the media and identifying whether there's any bias or discrimination in that media. And as you'll see, when we apply some of these typical media literacy concepts to artificial intelligence, we really do accelerate the need for some of those core skills. Now, if there's anybody watching this session who is a VCE media study teacher, you'll have probably come across various consumption theories and audience theories of media. And there's just one that I want to mention here because I think that it is really important to have a little bit of the media theory as we're looking at the impact of artificial intelligence. And it's one of my favorite media theories from my VCE times. So it's a theory called agenda setting function theory, or agenda setting theory. And it basically means that the media can't tell us what to think, but it can tell us what to think about. So by the prevalence of news articles in a particular publication or the number of front pages and headlines devoted to a story, by the use of color in images and the placement and size of images on pages and websites, and by the sheer volume of information on a particular subject, the media can influence how we see certain issues and can influence how we perceive the world around us. Now, again, like any audience theory for media, it is just a theory, and there are arguments for and against the theory. But I like agenda setting theory in line with artificial intelligence, because I think that what we're going to see with AI is a huge increase in the amount of deliberately misleading, sometimes fake news, and certainly artificially intelligently generated content. So AI generated images, AI generated text, even, as we'll see later, AI generated voices and videos. So the media can't tell us what to think. It's not going to put ideas in your head. That's a very old-fashioned way of thinking about the media. But it can tell us, to an extent, what to think about, and it can frame how we see the world. We know this is true, particularly on social media. Even if we see things which we know are fake, just seeing them in our Facebook feed or on a TikTok reel, or any of those platforms, can actually make us think about that issue. So we'll talk about some of those things that have cropped up over the last couple of months with AI image generation in particular. But I just want you to bear that little bit of media theory in mind as we go forwards. So as I said, this session and all of this series is about demystifying artificial intelligence. And part of that is getting a basic level of technical grasp in these technologies. Now, image generation is a very complex technology. It's a technology that's accelerated quite rapidly in the last few years, although some of the basis for the technology has been around for quite a long time. But it's really, really ramped up in development over even just the last 12 months. And we'll see some of that with the quality of the output of the images that I show you a bit later. In terms of getting a handle on the technical side of things, though, I want to give you a sort of intro level technical overview of how image generation works. Obviously, I'll be glossing over a lot of the sticky bits because it gives an indication of the strengths and the limitations of the technology that I think is something important that we can discuss with our students. So one very common sort of misconception about image generation is that it just takes in lots and lots of images from the internet, and then you type in what you're looking for, and it kind of looks through that database of images and cobbles together a new image by essentially kind of copying and pasting, a bit like it's photoshopping its own image together. So you might ask for an image of a bear holding a balloon, and it seems that what the AI is doing is going through its big database, and it's going, there's a picture of a bear, there's a picture of a balloon, let's smoosh them together. That's actually not what's happening, though, in the guts of one of these AI image generation systems. So I think it's important to again demystify some of what's going on there and start to think about the implications of that. So on the screen there, you can see there's a very pixelated image of a male face. And what we have here is the way that a computer actually sees this image. So the overlay in the middle there shows those color values overlaid over the top of that monochrome picture. So pixel by pixel, every individual pixel gets a value from 0 to 255, which tells the computer how to read that image. Now you see that image on the right there, that series of kind of grids and numbers. The array of data in that pixels is really what the computer's looking at. Okay, so if we take an image like a banana, for example, and we think about how the computer is seeing the image of the banana, then this helps us to start explaining how some of these AI image generation systems work. So they're not going through a database and looking for all the pictures of a banana, all right? But what it will do is it will take that banana and it will take the code that it's looking at, the selection of pixels, the combination of the colors and shapes and so on, and it will come up with a definition in its own terms of banana-iness. If you look at the graph on the right-hand side there, One of the aspects or variables of banana-iness might be its yellowness, and one might be its curviness, for example. So the algorithm that sits underneath image generation will go through masses and masses of data about images. And a lot of that data will be labeled. So we'll have lots of pictures of bananas, which are labeled as banana. And the algorithm will come to associate the yellowness and the curviness, maybe some of the textural features, maybe the part of the tip of the banana there where it joins the bunch with the image of a banana. So it creates all of these associations, which eventually build up to the computer's definition of a banana. Now, if we were to throw something else in there, like a yellow balloon, for example, then it would rate high on yellowness and high on curviness. So we'd actually need an extra variable, maybe something like shininess for the balloon would be high and fairly low for the banana, unless you've got a particularly shiny banana. And again, we need to keep iterating through, looking at lots of images of balloons and images of bananas and deciding which one's which. So you can imagine this is a fairly intensive process. It's not the way that humans learn. It's definitely in the realm of machine learning and not human learning. But eventually, with enough images, enough of a data set, the computer will generate enough dimensions, enough variables of yellowness, curviness, shininess, roundness, plasticness, whatever you like, that it can make a judgment between what's a banana and what's a balloon. Now, extending that out even further, we don't just have images of bananas and balloons on the internet. We have all kinds of things, predominantly images of cats, I think. So we have lots and lots of variables that we need to take into consideration, not just yellowness and curviness. We actually need to build these out in what's called multi-dimensional latent space, which I always think sounds like something from a Marvel movie. And what that basically means is that an image can be put in to one of these machines. It can be deconstructed and all of its variables kind of broken down in this multi-dimensional latent space. We can look at the gingerness of the cat. We can look at its cattiness. We can look at the grassiness of the grass. And all of these associated variables can then be combined back together to give us an image which reflects the image that we put in the first place. So we put in an image of the cat, we get out an image of a cat. Where this starts to get a little bit more involved and a bit more useful, really, to us as consumers, is where we can start to generate images, not from inputting an image, but actually by inputting text. And the way that we do that, again, is much more complicated than my little diagram here with the cats. But it does involve some of those technologies of large language models. So it involves natural language processing, just like ChatGPT. It involves our Marvel-esque multi-dimensional latent space with our yellowness and curviness and banana-iness and all of our other kinds of variables. And actually, one of the earlier models of Midjourney, which is a really common image generation software and one that I use, had over 500 dimensions in that multi-dimensional latent space. So this is an algorithm learning how to identify patterns in data. The data looks like arrays of numbers, doesn't look to us like an image would. And the computer reads that image and then uses it to encode and decode its images of its own. So it's not just copying and pasting. It is much more complex than that. And you see that we can take a photo of a ginger tabby cat jumping through long grass, shallow depth of field, expressive DSLR photography, aspect ratio 2:3 in my written prompt on the left there. And that's the image that we end up getting generated from the most recent version of Midjourney. Okay, so I wanted to give, again, that really brief technical overview, just to debunk a couple of the myths around how these technologies work, to show you some of the, I guess, the technical elements that go into these machines, but also then to talk about why they make the kinds of errors that they make, which I'll talk about later, how that might be useful in spotting an AI generated image in the current kinds of software that we've got available to us at the moment, and how we might work with our students in coming up ways of being critical and creative with these technologies. So this is my cat here. This is generated from that written prompt that you saw on the previous slide in Midjourney, which is one of the more powerful image generators. But there are several others out there. Midjourney requires a subscription. It didn't always require a subscription, but I'll talk very briefly about why it's a subscription only in a moment. And once you've got a subscription, you need to access it through Discord. So a lot of the ways of accessing image generation have put off a lot of the teachers that I've spoken to, because it's not as easy as just opening up ChatGPT. But just while we've got our little cat up on the screen there, I'll talk through a couple of other options for getting your hands on some image generation. So the easiest is probably to use something like Microsoft's Bing Chat. Microsoft's Bing Chat can be accessed in the Microsoft Edge browser, and you can do that on a Windows device or a Mac, or you can use the Bing app on your phone if you've got an iPhone or an Android or a Windows phone. So using the Bing Chat, you can type a prompt into Bing requesting an image. So if you've used Bing Chat as a kind of chatbot, you can also say, generate me an image of blah, 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 a ginger cat running through long grass, for example. So that's one way. Another way is to use OpenAI's product, which is DALL-E 2, so DALL-2. That's their, again, most up-to-date image generation model that's publicly available. It's also the one that underpins Microsoft's Bing Chat, and you can get to that one through the OpenAI website with a limited amount of free uses, and then you start to have to pay per use. Midjourney is this one. This is the one that I use. It does have a subscription fee of a few dollars a month. And then you have a limited number of uses before you run out, and you can top that up. And Stable Diffusion is the other most popular one. Now, I don't generally steer educators towards Stable Diffusion, because you need to have quite a bit of experience in writing the kinds of prompts that you need to use for Stable Diffusion. And the output is a lot more unpredictable than something like Midjourney. So you get a lot more weird kind of monstrous looking creatures and characters and people coming out of those. Nothing quite so lovely as my little ginger tabby cat. But although these image generation softwares are incredibly powerful and can be used for creative purposes beyond generating images of cats, there is obviously a huge potential for misuse, which is really what we're concerned with tonight when we start talking about media literacy. So have a think about the technical underpinnings that I've just run through. Think about the fact that that data set essentially trains an algorithm to break down images into their constituent parts and then create totally new images from scratch. So we're not just copying and pasting an image and kind of smooshing them together in an image mashup. We are totally generating novel images from scratch in that swirly whirly multi-dimensional space, which means that essentially anything is possible. Now, the more powerful these models get, the more capable they are at producing images without mistakes. And we're going to have to get very, very clever at catching some of those mistakes. And we will reach a point where these images are flawless. Now, we're not there yet. So carry on looking at my cat here, and I'll point out a few of the bizarre errors that you might pick up. So you might notice that there's a bit of sort of artifacts across the image. So some white stripes and glary lines and things like that. So sometimes we get those kind of strange distortions on an image. You might notice that its right front leg appears to be missing on a closer inspection. Maybe it could be running very, very quickly and it's got both its right legs sort of back behind it, but it definitely looks to me like one of its legs is a little bit awkward or missing there. Its front paw is a little bit distorted, and typically at the moment, these AI systems don't do hands and fingers and little intricate body parts very well. So there are things that we can look out for, and we'll see some of that as we go forwards. But again, they can be incredibly convincing. So you may have seen in the news over the last couple of months, various images coming out, which have been created in the same system as my ginger tabby cat in Midjourney predominantly. Now, this is one of the reasons why Midjourney has shifted over to a subscription-only model, is to reduce the number of people that can access it and use it for things like this. So on the screen at the moment, we've got the Pope in a lovely sort of fetching white Vatican issue puffer jacket, which is a totally fabricated AI image. We've got in the top right an image of Donald Trump being arrested, hauled out by the police there, which again was created in Midjourney. And on the bottom right corner there, we have a image of the Pentagon, or just a building adjacent to the Pentagon, and we've got flames, billowing smoke. We've got all kinds of chaos unfolding there, which obviously all three of these images went viral on Twitter. They were shared really, really widely. Now, almost straight away, people started flagging them as fake images. But remember back to that agenda setting function theory and the way that we can't tell you what to think, but we can tell you what to think about. And when 1 million people share an image of Donald Trump being arrested, even if it's a fake image, and even if people are identifying it very quickly as a fake image, then very quickly that news starts to circulate, particularly on social media. So the Pope one is, fairly benign, perhaps. It might suggest some dubious tastes in the Pope's wardrobe there, but it's obviously not potentially as politically damning as the other two images. But those other two images, again, both went viral. Now, we've got a US election coming up fairly soon, and we already know that the US government is very concerned about the impact that these technologies are going to have on some of their democratic processes. We know, as I'm sure you all aware, of the influence of social media on one of the previous elections. So there's a lot of drama unfolding at the moment around the implications for these technologies. And there are a huge number of challenges associated with the fake images and videos and some of those issues that those last three photos represent. So there are a number of challenges that this presents for us as educators that I think we need to talk to our students about. And first and foremost amongst them is the fact that fake images and video will be rapid. The escalation will be incredibly fast. We've seen enormous leaps and bounds in the quality of these images since, as I mentioned, within the last 12 months. They will become ubiquitous. It will be almost impossible to avoid coming across AI-generated images in the media. And it will be increasingly difficult to spot them. So part of that comes down to those core components of media literacy that I mentioned earlier. Not just glancing at an image, taking it as a given, and then liking it or sharing it onwards, but being actually really critical about the source of the image, about the likelihood of the veracity of the image, and then maybe triangulating that knowledge with a few other places, a few other sources, or a few other people whose opinions you might respect online. The bias and discrimination issue is also going to be incredibly important in light of these AI image generation softwares. So if you were in the first couple of sessions, you will have heard me talking about bias in ChatGPT and how a system like ChatGPT actually has a lot of bias built into it. So that kind of incidental bias that comes from the data set, because most of the text on the web that the model is built on top of is drawn from text written by white, Western, male internet users. So there's a bias built into image generation too. The bias that's built into image generation, again, comes from the huge data set. So in the data set, we have, as I mentioned, a lot of images which have been, in some cases, manually labeled by humans, and in some cases, labeled by AI image recognition. Whenever you do one of those prove you're not a robot captures on the internet, you're training an AI model to recognize images because you're labeling image data for them. So that's really what they're for. So when you're proving you're not a robot, ironically, what you're doing is training a robot to be more like a human, which is a little bit concerning. But when we look at those data sets, what we find is that there's a lot of bias built into them. So if you use image generation software and you type in something like photograph of a CEO, it will almost invariably give you an image of a white middle-aged man. Ditto, if you type in image of a doctor, you'll get a white middle-aged man. If you type in image of a teacher, you'll likely get a slightly younger woman, still white generally. So there are racial biases, there are gender biases, there are societal biases baked into these image sets because of the images that they draw on. Now, there's only a couple of ways that we can avoid this. One is that we can put barriers in place after the fact. So we can take a huge data set, we can train our image generation model, and then we can say, put some rules in that say not all CEOs are male, not all teachers are white, and so on. The CEO of Midjourney has come out and said he's absolutely not going to do that because he doesn't feel like it would be appropriate to influence the data set after the fact. So then the only other way to deal with that bias is to include more diverse images in the data sets. And that requires much more data, much broader data, and data, again, which is labeled appropriately. So that bias and discrimination, unfortunately, is not going anywhere soon. And I think that's something that we need to make our students, again, aware of. So if they're coming across images online, if those images are very stereotypical, if those images reflect societal biases or societal stereotypes, there is, again, a chance that those images have been generated by AI. Targeted advertising is something else that we need to think about with media literacy and AI. So we know these companies already have a lot of our data. So we know particularly companies like Meta, who own Facebook, have tremendous amounts of our personal data on what we like, what we share, what we read online, even the kinds of websites that we browse outside of Facebook, who we're friends with, their jobs, our life histories, everything imaginable. Facebook has recently released a new app, Threads, which is a kind of Twitter replacement. And again, its privacy policies are very concerning. So Threads is well able to collect your biometric data. So if you wear a smartwatch, that's your health data, your steps, your heart rate, location data, even data from photos and images that you take and share. All of that data can get fed through to these algorithms and be used potentially to generate images which are targeted directly at you and directly for the kinds of things that you've been searching for, and so on. So within Microsoft's terms and conditions, in its Bing chat search engine, well within their rights to use any of your search data to generate personalized and targeted advertisements. You imagine that combined with image generation, and very soon we're going to have adverts popping up in our feeds which look and sound exactly like what we need when we need it, which will be incredibly persuasive. And again, something that we need to raise with our students as they're using these platforms all the time. And then we've got audio, visual, and video deepfakes, and I'm going to share a deepfake of Barack Obama with you in a moment, just so you can see what one of those looks like. The technology is not perfect at the moment, but it's getting better and better and better. I've done a deepfake of my own voice, which was convincing enough to fool my wife, based on about 20 minutes of audio recording from one of my PD sessions. iPhone will roll out iOS 17 soon with a voice AI replication software in there, which has been developed to help people with disabilities, particularly with disabilities which are leading to degenerative diseases where they might be losing the control of their voice. MS, Parkinson's, and those kinds of things, which can replicate your voice, and where you can use your iPhone, type in any of the messages and get it to speak that aloud in your voice. So there are some positive uses, but we know obviously that there will be some harmful content generated with these things as well. For those of you that have got students, particularly in the upper primary and in going into secondary school, I would really strongly encourage you to look at engaging experts in talking to students about things like pornography and sex education. And increasingly, there's a crossover now with these technologies and those more kind of nefarious areas of the internet. And unfortunately, we know that artificial intelligence and this kind of image generation is already being used in the context of pornography with deepfakes. So all of these kind of sit broadly under the umbrella of media literacy, and they're all equally concerning. But I think that there are things that we can do in education to help combat some of those concerns. So I'm going to show you that little Obama video. Now, I'm hoping you get sound as well once this starts, but always hit and miss. See how the technology goes. We're not playing this afternoon. Okay, so instead of me showing you this video, it's on YouTube. You can just Google it yourself. So if you look for just this little BBC clip of Barack Obama deepfake, what you'll see is that an internet user has taken an image video of Barack Obama talking. They've run that through an artificial intelligence system and then replaced that with and it's just the mouth that gets replaced, a new talking mouth with them talking and doing an impression of Barack Obama's voice. And essentially what it does is it puts whatever this guy says into a video that looks convincingly of Barack Obama talking. Now, again, at the moment, we're early days with these technologies. And when you watch this video, what you'll see is that his mouth moves kind of awkwardly, sometimes not in sync with the rest of the head movements. There's a little bit of artifact, a little bit of blurring around where the mouth joins the face. So it's a little bit kind of in the uncanny valley still at the moment. It's not entirely convincing. But again, we are very, very, very early in the development of these technologies, and they are only going to get better. So I would encourage you to go and seek out that video of Barack Obama with somebody putting words into his mouth. Now, in education, I think that we are more than capable of talking about some of these issues. I think that we're more than capable of raising these issues with students, discussing them with students in primary and in secondary school, making them aware of some of the threats and the problems that are out there, and also making them aware of some of the opportunities that these technologies present. So in the final session that I'm running for ACME, which is coming up soon, the point of that last session will be to talk about some of the creative possibilities for these technologies, because I'm sure that on the whole, the way that these technologies will get used will be positive rather than negative. But I don't think we can shy away from the needs for media literacy. So we need to understand the technology and its capabilities, first of all. That involves you going and signing up to some image generation, signing up to Midjourney or DALL-E or Bing or Stable Diffusion, and just having a bit of a play around. See what you can come up with, see what you can do, see what you can't do, see what the limitations are, find out if there are any restrictions put on those technologies, anything that you aren't allowed to do. Really just push and push and push until you are comfortable with using and then demonstrating and talking to these to your students. Right now, we can look for some telltale signs of image and video manipulation. So like Barack Obama, we can look for his blurring around his mouth and the slightly out of sync mouth and eye movements. If you go online and you find the full versions of these photos, you'll see the Pope's hand is slightly distorted. You'll see some artifacting around the smoke and in this image. You'll see that the police officers have distorted hands, and one of them, I think, has 3 legs in this, because, as I say, at the moment, image generation can't really deal with those intricate body parts or very, very complex and confusing pictures. And also look for, just in that kind of critical literacy sense, look for ways where the picture seems out of context, or like it's too good to be true or too bad to be true. And, you know, share and like and talk about these images online with discretion. In the future, what we have on the horizon are a number of safeguards against these technologies. So OpenAI is working on image generation tagging. Google has partnered with Adobe, and their model Firefly is incorporating metadata, which is attached to AI generated images. There will always be a potential for people to build their own systems. A lot of this software is out there open source, so anyone can build these things, which means that there is potential for people to build models which don't have the metadata, don't have the tagging. And there we might rely on things like community labeling, which is like what happens on social media when a lot of people suddenly start to comment and say, this is fake. And I think in the future, the capacity of people en masse to be able to identify fake news is going to become more and more important. But primarily, that biggest strategy I think that we have, and our biggest defense against these problems, is education. So I'll just finish up by talking about copyright and generative AI, because I don't think you can talk about image generation without talking about copyright. And this actually feeds forward into the next session, where I'll talk more about the creative applications. So at the moment, there are very different laws in different jurisdictions about generating AI images and who holds the copyright and so on. In Australia, AI generated image content can't be copyrighted because it's considered not enough human input. In the US, after a recent case, an artist can copyright the structure, narrative, dialogue, for example, in a graphic novel, but not the actual images. Okay, so they can copyright the intellectual property of the story if it's a graphic novel, for example, but they can't copyright the individual images if they're generated by AI. Companies creating the image models, so OpenAI, Stability AI, Midjourney, and so on, are not currently in breach of copyright because the scraping of image data, that huge collection for the data set, doesn't breach copyright laws in most jurisdictions. It falls underneath some of the research and data science laws. Some of that, though, might change over the coming months. And you may have seen that there are high-profile court cases in the US at the moment, in particular, where artists are going up against companies like OpenAI and pushing back for their rights to their intellectual property. So it's a really interesting space which is going to be unfolding over the next few months. And hopefully we have some kind of resolution and we find out a little bit more clearly how we can and can't use these technologies. Okay, so there's our media literacy session that's flown by. Zoe, I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat if you want to throw those at me, and then we'll talk about the next session.
Great, thanks, Leon. We did have a question from Karen about what programs you're using for image generation, which you did touch on, but I wondered if you could just maybe give a quick recap of some that would be suitable for students to use, preferably free, just a little recap of the ones you mentioned earlier.
For students, I would generally stick with Bing Chat using DALL-E. So as I said earlier, Bing Chat uses OpenAI's DALL-E 2. And it's free to access, it's easy to access, and most students can get the Microsoft Edge browser on their school computers. So yeah, use the Microsoft Bing Chat. Not as powerful as Midjourney, but free and very easy.
Excellent. Another question from Emily. Do you have a view on the appropriate level of balance between teaching the risks versus the opportunities?
Yeah, I think look, I might be overly cautious here, or this might be my critical literacy kind of background. I think we start with the risks and then we open up to the opportunities. I think as well that students, in my experience, find those ethical conversations really engaging. Certainly as a VC English and media teacher, I found some of the best discussions I've had with my students have been when you throw a really curvy ethical problem at them. And once you've got that ethical grounding, I think that's a really good place to jump off into some of the creative applications.
Lovely. Final question, does DALL-E need credits?
If you use it through the OpenAI website, I think on sign up, you still get a couple of free credits and then you need to pay per credit or batch of credits. If you're using it through Bing, it lets you generate a certain number of images per day. I'm not sure what that is and it always changes, but once you reach that limit, you can't generate any more until tomorrow.
Wonderful. That's all our questions for today. Thank you so much, Leon. That was really enlightening and really some important issues that I think we'll all be thinking about after today. Just a reminder that our final webinar in the series will be about the future of AI in art, film and video games. And that will be 3:45 to 4:35 on Wednesday, the 6th of September. As usual, we'll send you the Zoom link reminder a couple of days out and another one on the day. And if you have any issues accessing the recording, once we email you the link, please do email us at education@acme.net.au. And we'll look forward to seeing you all then. And thanks again, Leon. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. I'll see you in September.